Have you ever heard these statistics that you hear all the time about how there's millions of people who claim to be Christians in America? Millions and millions and millions and millions of people. All in America claim to be Christian. And you think, man, if that were really true, it seems like life would be different in America if all these people who claim to be Christian were really Christian. You know what I mean? Like there's millions of these Christians, and you think, why is life not better now for us then? And I believe the answer is because most of these Christians are stagnant. So many people who claim to follow Christ follow him. They follow him to church. And then they leave church, and that's when they leave him. They leave him at church, and that's all they do is they follow him in the door and out the door, and nothing changes in their life. They allow themselves to become stagnant and therefore useless, just like water. And speaking of water, I don't know if you recognize this connection, but the Bible has a few things to say about water that has no use, about water that's neither hot nor cold, that doesn't have a purpose. Revelation 3, where God is speaking to the church of Laodicea, and he says, I know your deeds, that you are neither hot nor cold, and I wish you were one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, I will neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. God uses the term lukewarm to describe Christians that were stagnant. And if you think about it, I've heard some people say, and I think I may have even mentioned this before in a sermon, but some people say, oh, well, you need to be hot. You don't want to be a cold Christian. You need to be hot. But that's not what it says. He wants you to be one or the other because they both have uses. Hot water is used for bathing and cooking. And cold water, I mean, you want cold water to drink when you're thirsty, right? But you leave them both alone for a while, and they both become lukewarm. They both become lukewarm. And that is disgusting to God. I mean, he says, I spit you out of my mouth. I throw you up. And that's what I do with water. If it's lukewarm, I'm like, ugh. Especially if you think it's a Sprite. And then it's water. Then it's like not even good water, even if it's cold. But Aikita Mancha is our high school Bible study. It's Spanish for stain remover. And we've been meeting this past semester every Tuesday. And we've been going through this book, Crazy Love. And I had just heard about it before the semester started. It was actually the first time I'd ever gone through a book study with the group and had not read the book ahead of time. But I heard so much good stuff about it. And I remember a couple of people said, it's really good, but when you get to chapter 4, get ready. It's going to kick your butt. And I'm like, oh, all right. And so we read the first 3 chapters. We go a chapter a week, and it was good. And then we get to chapter 4, and no joke, it kicked our butts. And like the kids were like, oh, they're almost depressed after we got done reading it. And the reason is because it talks about this idea of a lukewarm Christian. And he does a lot better job than I do. And so I'm going to read parts of what he says. And so just bear with me. It's going to be a little bit. But let me make sure I'm writing on the right place. Okay, here we go. He says, the Bible says to test ourselves. So in the next few pages, I'm going to offer you a description of what half-hearted, distracted, partially committed, lukewarm people can look like. And he proceeds to give examples of what lukewarmness, I guess, in people looks like. And he has like 18 examples. And I told Nick about this. Nick's preaching next week. And I was like, here's my sermon. I'm thinking about this. And there's part of me talking about lukewarm. And I'm thinking about going through this list of 18. And his face just, and he's like, oh no. And I'm like, oh no, this is a bad idea. This is a stupid idea. And he's like, I was going to preach on lukewarm next week. And so I told him I'm only going to talk briefly about it. But I wanted to mention a few of these points in here. So that's also a preview of next sermon next week. So these are a few of the things about what a lukewarm Christian looks like. And the reason we started to get a little upset, myself included, is because all of a sudden you think, oh, lukewarm Christians, they do this kind of stuff. And as you read it, you're like, oh, that sounds a lot like me too. So for example, he says, lukewarm people attend church fairly regularly. It's what's expected of them. They go, what they believe good Christians do is to go to church, and so they go. Lukewarm people don't really want to be saved from their sin. They only want to be saved from the penalty of their sin. They don't genuinely hate sin, and they're not really sorry that they sinned. They're just sorry that they're going to go to hell if they keep sinning, and so they apologize to God and stop sinning. Lukewarm people are moved by stories about people who do radical things for Christ, and yet they don't act. They assume such action is for extreme Christians, not average ones. And lukewarm people call radical what Jesus expected of all of his followers. Lukewarm people gauge their morality or goodness by comparing themselves to the secular world. They feel satisfied that while they aren't as good as some hardcore so-and-so, they're nowhere near as horrible as that guy down the street. Lukewarm people are thankful for their luxuries and comforts and rarely consider trying to give as much as possible to the poor. They are quick to point out, Jesus never said money is the root of all evil. It's only the love of money that is. Untold numbers of lukewarm people feel called to minister to the rich. Very few feel called to minister to the poor. And two more. Lukewarm people feel secure because they attend church, made a profession of faith at age 12, were baptized, come from a Christian family, vote Republican, or live in America. Just as the prophets of the Old Testament warned Israel that they were not saved just because they lived in the land of Israel, so we are not saved just because we wear the label Christian or because some people persist on calling us a Christian nation. And lastly, lukewarm people probably drink and swear less than average, but besides that, they really aren't very different from your typical unbeliever. They equate their partially sanitized lives with holiness, but they couldn't be more wrong. And then he gives us one little example. I'm going to read this and finish this part. He says, when I was in high school, I seriously considered joining the Marines. And this is when they first came out with the commercials for the few, the proud, the Marines. And what turned me off was that those advertisements, everyone was running. Always. I hate running. But you know what? I didn't bother to ask if they would modify the rules for me so I could run this. And maybe also do a fewer push-ups. That would have been pointless and stupid, and I knew it. Everybody knows, this is the big thing, everybody knows that if you sign up for the Marines, you have to do whatever they tell you, that they own you. And somehow, this realization does not cross over to our thinking about Christian life. Jesus didn't say, if you want to follow me, you can do it in a lukewarm manner, whenever it's convenient. You can only do a little bit. He said, take up your cross and follow me. So the first thing, why should we embrace change? Because change is biblical. Number two, because change equals growth. And number three, without change, we become stagnant. And like it says in the Bible, God throws us up out of his mouth. Oh, I didn't tell you the best part of all this. He talked about the fact that if you consider yourself a lukewarm Christian, he says that's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a lukewarm and Christian. And so we're reading this, and we're like, oh, that kind of sounds like me. Oh, I do that too. And then he's like, by the way, lukewarm Christian is not the same. You know what happens to lukewarm people? God throws them up. You're not going to be Christian and lukewarm. You have to be one or the other. And so that's when we were all like, oh man. And people started really kind of worry about, what am I doing with my life? Am I really trying to honor God, or am I living a lukewarm life? Anyway, it was a good chapter. So the first question I asked was, how can we embrace change? And we talked about that. And the second question I want to focus on is, how can we change?